Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. Looks like I have questions across a couple of different platforms, so I'm just going to jump right in. Over on Floatplane, BroVideo said a complete Model 2 Sega CD kit comes with at least 3 pieces of metal shielding. It's rare to find them all nowadays when buying used Sega CDs. Most people consider them optional. It's common for shielding like that to just be for passing EMI regulations, but I'm wondering if in the case of the Sega CD it has effect on audio or video quality. I don't have all the shielding for my Sega CD, so I can't test it myself. Do you have any experience with this? Yes and no. The experience that I do have is all of the very, very extensive MD Fourier testing that a bunch of us were taking part in were done with Sega CDs that, as far as I know, didn't have any metal shielding. Mine sure as heck didn't. And it seemed fine. Now, yes, those really were usually just to pass through the different regulations that are out there. And different countries had different regulations, which is why if you open up a Japanese Master System, it's a board inside a piece of plastic, whereas the US Master Systems have the shielding around them. Now, I haven't experienced any kind of weirdness with the Sega CD, so at least not what you're describing. I haven't gotten like a weird buzz or anything that's not part of the normal operation. Because remember, all analog consoles are always going to have noise. It's just the way it is. You know, a stock Sega Genesis with fully recapped and cleaned up, if you put on your headphones and you turn the volume up, there's going to be a hum in there. It's just the way it is. But I think what you're probably talking about is is there a noticeable difference? Is it something that not just can be measured, but if you're sitting down playing and listening, can you actually see a difference? And the answer is I really don't think so, and certainly not in any of my testing. It is a good question, though, because it's stuff like that. Like, normally I really wouldn't care about RF shielding, but there are some consoles where I'm just like, let me make sure to keep it because it's a weird console and there's always some strangeness to it. But no, I'm pretty sure you don't even need any of the shielding, and it's just something that's kind of neat just because it's a piece of history, but all it does is make the console weigh even more, and if you ever have to ship it, now you're going to pay more for shipping pieces of metal with it. One more from BroVideo. Am I aware of any reputable resources for ways to effectively and non-destructively de-yellow old consoles? There's no shortage of information out there, but it's hard to know who to trust. I think the biggest issue is that not all plastics are going to react to the same methods the same way. And I think that's why there's such a wide variety of info out there where people say, hey, I did this last year, it came out perfect, and the plastic is still perfect. And there's other people out there that said, I followed your exact method and the plastic is brittle and cracking, or it went right back to yellow in a few months, or etc. So I really don't know if there's a good guide to follow, other than maybe if it's possible, either try to take a console that has yellowed plastic and maybe start with just the back of it in a spot that you can't really see and do an experiment, or try to find other plastics like it. And I could just do some experiments and see what happens. But for me personally, I'm not telling you this is what you should do. Just the stance I've taken on this is if I have a console with a case that's yellowed and beat up, I'll look for those really cool clear cases, or the smoke clear ones are the ones that I think are really the best, in my opinion, because at a certain angle it almost looks like a solid color, but then you get up close and you can see through it and stuff like that. They tend to be expensive, but I really do enjoy those. However, I do plan on taking a TRS-80 color computer too. I had found it on eBay a few years ago for dirt cheap, and I had the exact same model when I was a little kid, so I feel like it would be really cool to do a restoration video on that and mess around with trying to de-yellow it. And I think the method I'm going to test for that is taking I think that, in a perfect world, what I would do is take a small fish tank, fill it with hydrogen peroxide, and line it with UV lights. And I believe Voltar showed that in one of his videos as well. And then just dip it inside, kind of hang it so it's evenly braced, and just do it for a couple hours at a time, and then let it dry afterwards. And then, to be honest, whenever I clean plastic, I use non-abrasive dish detergent along with a plastic brush with soft bristles. You don't want to scratch the plastic. But I would definitely, after doing any experiment like this, scrub it clean, just so any of the chemicals that are in there don't stay in there and continue to eat away at it. I don't know if that's something people have ever talked about. I just know basic residue chemical stuff means that you should probably always hose something like that down and not just, wipe it off or something like that. But it's really the only suggestions I have. I don't have any secrets for that other than I plan on revisiting it at some point. But it's, with all these amazing case replacements out there, it's kind of low on the priority list for me. Kelv SYC just wanted to follow up a little bit about the discussion of using USB power supplies to power retro consoles, and also just kind of agreed and seemed that there's definitely the chance of problems doing that. But the other question Kelv had was, it said that powering an N64 requires a source of both 3.3 volts and 12 volt power, thus somewhat justifying its odd power adapter compared to the standard barrel jacks of their competitors. Having seen a video of a user attempting to replace an N64 power supply with one taken from an old phone that could supply the needed power, it leads to the question, has there been any real effort to commission an adapter of sorts so that the N64 could be used with the community-approved Triad power supplies? Yeah, GameTech has one. I have not tested it yet. And to be honest, I haven't given it a close look yet, but you should be able to use a buck converter to start at 12 volts and then change it so that it also outputs 3.3 volts. And if that's really well done and you use something like a verified power brick, then that should be a good solution. But just once again, I don't ever want to minimize the danger of bad power, because it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm going to take, half a percentage off of my console's lifetime. Like, if you're using dirty power, you could cut that console's lifespan in half easy, or just blow it out altogether. There are some protections involved on these consoles, but depending on the type of power, it's not going to really help for long-term improper wear, I guess is the better way to say it. But thanks for chiming in. Blackguard was just following up on the discussion of trying to find good screwdriver bits. I believe Wera was the brand that I was talking about. Illuminato pointed that out to me. I haven't found any of my old screwdrivers, though, so I can't confirm that, but it does seem like a bunch of people claim that's a very good brand. And I also had a few people say that the iFixit screwdrivers are actually pretty good quality, especially for the price. So if you were all looking for that, maybe look into those two. And if I could ever find the exact ones I used to use that I loved, I'll just put a link up on the Amazon store. Zags had a couple of questions. First, would running a wireless sensor bar for a Wii cause a massive difference in latency? I don't think it should cause any difference in latency, because unless I'm thinking about this wrong, I think the sensor bar is just sending information back and forth to the controller, like here I am, like a mirror, like a signal light, if you will. And I think the only reason it's wired to the Wii is because that's how it's powered, whereas the battery-powered wireless ones are just powered by battery. But I think it's the same thing, just reflecting back. Kind of like, anybody remember laser tag? I don't know why that's popping into my head. I could be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. I'm just remembering this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure when I researched it, that was the info that I had gotten. But if I got this all wrong, please leave it in the comments. I always enjoy learning from everybody, but that's definitely how I'm remembering it, at least. Next, they can't find anyone stocking region parts for PC Engine. Did you try GameTech though? I believe he used to stock those, so I'm not really sure. But you also asked, do I have a recommendation for some SCART head parts and wire? I don't think the SCART coupler would be reasonable for their setup, but they do need a 12-inch cable to connect their Hydra to the OSSC. They have a 6-foot cable from Amazon that's decent quality, and thought about cutting it open and resoldering it, but a fresh cable would be a better option. Retro Access always sells when I'm at work, so I can never get into the window to buy a cable. Retro Access would be my first choice in that one. I see if Retro Gaming Cables makes them, but if you're dead set on making your own, what you could end up doing is getting a shielded VGA cable, which I have them linked in my Amazon shop. And if you're if you live in a different region, or if you have a couple, unfortunately, the only thing you could really do is buy two, cut one open, and and see if it actually is really shielded. But you could do that, and then you could just make adapters on each side. I'm really hoping people take that open source SCART coupler and really run with it. I really hope people take that design and make exactly the same size and shape, but with a VGA end and some RCA connectors, or a 3.5 millimeter connector for audio. I hope people recreate that whole component video to SCART adapter that I think I helped get a run of them out to people a few years ago. So I think that would really be awesome. And now that it's out there and open source and tested, I hope a lot of people will jump on that. But I really think having the same exact thing as the SCART coupler, but shorter, because you don't need it to be as tall, and having a VGA connection on it would be awesome for this exact reason. That way you could just have longer runs of VGA shielded cables and then just put one on each end of this. But I guess that's up to the community if they want to jump on it and do stuff like that. But I really hope to see that kind of just be a jumping off point to a bunch of different adapters that we could find. Mark Main says they know the GameCube does support 16:9 and 480p resolutions, and we're lucky enough to find component cables, but have yet to upgrade to HDMI devices, as I had the component cables before they came out and haven't felt it immediately necessary to get an HDMI device. Well, I'm just going to stop there. I haven't read the rest of your question yet, but if you already have the GameCube component cables, just try one of those really cheap component to HDMI converters. It'll only output in whatever the resolution of the GameCube is, but with Swiss, you could force almost everything to 480p, including original discs. So you don't even need to mod the console. It's all plug and play, and you could use all original games as well. So you just might not need one. There is, of course, the whole discussion of any analog signal will always have a little bit of interference. So, but I mean, those are good cables. So I don't know. I would just kind of think about that and see if that's something you really needed. But to continue your question, when you're playing Mario Strikers, you set the game to widescreen in the settings, but the screen does not change to widescreen. I thought it might be anamorphic, so I stretched the screen and it just looked warped. So how do I display the widescreen games in widescreen? Honestly, I don't really have an issue with that, but I also, every time I go to do anything like that, I use Swiss to launch it a certain way. So I can't even remember going back and setting it manually in a long time. I think I've always just used Swiss for that. So you might want to check that. Last thing, but does Swiss support booting in 480p? I have one of those cheap component to HDMI converters, but Swiss won't display. We just talked about that a second ago. I'm assuming the menu's in 480i or 240p or something, because it works fine when I connect composite directly. But you need some kind of SD reader that's not the GC loader. So either a front port one or the bottom SD to SP2, so many acronyms. But if you boot Swiss from one of those, then you're able to save the settings. You just have to go into, look at the bottom bar. It says like press B to change device, press C to enter settings, whatever that is, but go in and set the main menu settings. And what would probably happen is, as you're powering on your GameCube, when the logo's coming up, you'll get no signal on your TV, but as soon as Swiss boots, you will get a signal. So definitely try that. I've tested that too, because my main GameCube that I use is actually a PAL GameCube. And whenever I boot to Swiss, I have it set to boot Swiss into 480p NTSC. So when I'm on a non-PAL compatible display, I get nothing until Swiss boots, but then it all comes into play. So that's definitely the best thing to choose. Just remember, if you're booting with a GC loader, at least at the current moment, there's no way to save back to that SD card. You have to have a second SD solution in order to do that. So definitely give that a try. Doomleg wants to know if there's any particular reason why Mr. Cores can't save a list of recently played games. Don't they? Isn't there some kind of new option for that now that was just recently released? It's not on the main menu, and I think it's something you would have to enable and you might even have to enable it in the INI file, but double check. It might have something like that. And to answer your question, most of the time, when you ask questions like, why doesn't Mr. have, the honest answer is just the developers haven't gotten to it yet. And with respect to the team, they're pumping out some amazing updates all the time. So if we're getting stuff like brand new amazing cores but not lists of recently played games, I'm all right with that. I'm not poo-pooing your question or anything. It's a totally valid question. It's just usually the answer is because they're working on some crazy stuff, and they'll get to that eventually. But I would check the release logs and check the options and see, because I could swear there was some kind of recently played game list that you have to enable but is actually available now. Dave Sobel wants to know if there's anything that could be done for audio clipping in OSSC 5X modes besides adjusting sample timings. Adjusting those seems to alleviate the issue a bit, but no matter what I do, the audio still cuts out. I'm pretty happy with optimal 4X timings from Firebrand X on my setup, but further insight would be appreciated. The only things I could think of is running it through another device, but you would want to check that with a time sleuth. So that SCART to HDMI adapter, that, the one that was designed for TV signals but should never be used for gaming, if you're doing video capture, so like if you're going into a PVM and then out of the PVM into that SCART to HDMI box into your capture card, that's normally a perfectly good idea. People have reported that it messes with the colors a little bit, but I think it's a worthy trade-off. However, it adds a bunch of lag through its HDMI port, so that's the type of stuff you need to look out for. But running through an AVR, running through an Xbox One X, there's a bunch of different devices you could pass it through that I've had people say that it totally normalizes it. And there's even some AVRs that people have lag tested with the time sleuth, and I think it adds less than a millisecond of lag, which should, in all honesty, for video games be counted as zero. And it totally normalizes everything. It recognizes the audio, and its HDMI output goes to capture cards without any trouble. So if possible, I would try running it through a device, but if not, I would just stick to 4X mode for now. The GOAT says they recently upgraded the firmware on their N64 RGB Advance by Bordy, and the 240p 3X mode, 720p, works with their BVM D32, but it stretches the picture to the whole screen, and the 16:9 enabled disable control doesn't seem to function while the BVM is displaying a 720p signal. With a 480p signal, the 16:9 control does work as expected. Do I have any idea how to get it to display 720p in a 4:3 aspect ratio? That's interesting. I've never been in a situation before where I needed to do that. And also, respectfully, I'm not being negative about this, but I'm really curious what you would gain by running 720p into the BVM like that with an N64. Does it smooth out the image or something? Is it just neat and fun and something that you want to experiment with? Definitely let me know, because maybe you have a cool idea that I haven't thought of yet or something. Honestly, though, you might want to just check every option in the N64 Advanced board and see if there's something in there. It's possible that Bordy's just sending it the entire signal across, the full width, and then you would have to take your TV and squish it back to 4:3. And if that's the case, there would be nothing you could do in this scenario. But I would just kind of look into it a little bit more. And also, definitely wondering why 720p is something you would want in that scenario. If your answer is because I feel like it, that's a perfectly reasonable answer, by the way. I'm just kind of curious about that. Blue Rigel 81 says they're aware that the NES video signal has areas on the left and right sides of the image that were usually hidden on older TVs. Sometimes these areas are black, but other times they're a solid color that matches the background. This annoys me at times, especially when it ruins the letterbox effect in cutscenes in games like Ninja Gaiden. They primarily use a retro USB AVS to play NES games on their flat panel, which doesn't have these side areas as part of the image, but for times when I'd like to use my original console, is there a way to basically crop the image before it gets to the TV that would allow these areas to be hidden or removed? I've also seen part of these areas on some later CRTs. They've also seen this on some later edition CRTs, and you could use the service mode option to slightly widen the image until they were hidden, but the TV I use now has no such option. So I'm curious if there would also be a way to crop the image before it gets to an analog display. Crop it before it gets to a flat panel depends on the scaler. RetroTink can't usually do that. I'm pretty sure they don't, whereas the OSSC can, and I think the FrameMeister can as well. But on a CRT, it's all up to getting into the service menu and changing the geometry. And if you're just doing height and width, that should be something that you could feel free to play around with. Just write down the values and don't mess with anything else just in case. But that should be pretty safe to do. And if your TV doesn't have that, then there's no way to do that, unfortunately. Sorry. Jason Guffey has a couple of questions. I'll see if I could answer this all in one shot. I might have to break it up. First, GBS control doesn't seem to be taking input from the VGA in, but component video works fine. Could I have screwed something up with the 3 color pots they had to desolder and wire after? I don't know how VGA alone wouldn't work. Apparently that's just a thing on these. I don't think it's related to GBS control as much as it is to those cheap boards. Because remember, these are very cheaply made boards. The quality control on them probably isn't the best. And I've found that if you buy 5 from the same seller, you might get 5 very slightly different performance out of them doing the exact same mods to each. So I would just, if you absolutely needed VGA, I would try VGA to component converter just to see if that worked. But I know that's a pain. That the whole point of a device like that is so that you could have all of those inputs and all of that, all of that flexibility. So it kind of stinks. It definitely happened to me. It also happened to me when shooting an upcoming video that's not out yet. So I have to cut in different footage and stuff like that. Next, for the GBS board, they ordered the one that only has one output, but it does have a terminal for connecting another output, and even came with the wires and a connector to do it. Is it feasible to just solder these wires to an additional VGA connector, or is this extra out unusable for whatever reason? So much like the non-powered Otaku SCART switch, this one has multiple outputs connected to the same signals. So that is for something like if you're wiring it directly to an RGBS connection, or you change it to component video out and you want to wire up some RCA terminals or something, but it is the same exact signals that it's tapping. And in fact, on the one with dual outputs, each of the dual outputs also has that same connector on there. So, you could look at it as 4 output options, but only 2 simultaneous. So no, you can't do it that way. Looks like I did have to break it up. I screwed up the second part of your answer. So the second thing that Jason wanted to ask about was the DVDO iScan VP50, and is it really as good as people talk about? And is there anything new coming up that could rival it? Honestly, it is pretty darn awesome, and if you could find one on eBay, then they're worth the money. I just got one a few months ago for like $300 or something. It's got less than a frame of lag, going from 480p up to 1080p, averaging between 8 and 11 milliseconds I saw, but not variable. It was different depending on the resolution, but it stayed solid as I was doing the tests, and I did the tests on a CRT as well, just to double check all of that stuff. So it was pretty solid in that. So if you have things like the Carby or the Wii Dual or anything like that, it would be a good solution. Also, it's renowned for its deinterlacing. So while it does have standard Bob deinterlacing, which, if you get a DVDO device, don't bother with that. If you go into game mode 2, it's about a frame and a half of lag, so probably one of the lowest out there, and it looks really, really good. I'm not sure if I would say it looks better than the FrameMeister, but it certainly holds its own. And of course, that is one of the best deinterlacers you can get for just TV signals as well. So, it's something where if you were to ever stumble across one, I would absolutely pick it up, knowing that it's going to be something that you could use as long as you're using any kind of retro, including just DVDs and 480i, if you should so desire. However, newer scalers are coming out with gaming specifically in mind. The OSSC Pro has an HDMI input. There's a few other prototypes floating around that do not have HDMI inputs, and there's also some prototypes floating around that I don't know why people are showing pictures of them, to be honest with you, because they're just prototypes at this point. But the point being, there are absolutely at least the OSSC Pro coming out within the next year that's designed to scale HDMI signals from video games. So I would really just kind of gauge it based on that. Now, you might be able to get a VP50 for less than what the OSSC Pro would sell for, and it does even regulate and normalize the OSSC's 5x output. So you could do that. You could run the OSSC into the DVDO and output 1080p and only gain half a frame of lag, which I guess would help the earlier question about fixing audio, but I wouldn't go hunting one down unless you had a very specific reason for any of that. I would honestly just stick to waiting for the OSSC Pro, or if you stumbled across it, grab it. You might as well, because it's going to do a lot of cool stuff for you. And, it's just one of those tools that as long as you're playing retro, you probably would be able to use it somehow. Well, that's it for this week. If there's any newcomers, I just want to remind you to please post any questions at all that you have in the latest Q&A post, wherever it is that you support. I would love to someday find a way to centralize all of this so that the support platforms are just the jumping off point and everybody has a centralized location to post questions, discuss, and all that. Discord isn't quite the best place for that because it becomes a discussion, and then you can't really, I don't know of a way to just like submit questions only through there or something. So any suggestions, of course, I'm always all ears. I just want to do what's best for everybody. But I do still see people asking questions in the main YouTube comments, whereas if you're a supporter looking to ask questions, please just put them wherever it is that you support in the very latest support post, because I can't really go back and sift through the old ones and try to remember which ones I answered and which ones I didn't. I would never get it right. So anyway, as always, thank you all for participating in this. I do enjoy these. And of course, thank you so much to people that support, because without you, none of these videos, any of the research I'm involved in, or any of the other fun stuff would ever happen. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.